You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
Okay, guys, so we're here on a Tuesday night talking about burnout.
Well, I think the more appropriate term that I would want to use is charred out. I mean, burnout sounds very polite and doesn't really do justice to the amount of burnout that happens on a daily basis.
Hey, what's up? How are you?
Work is so stressful, yeah.
Man, I feel like I'm wasting my youth.
I feel like I just can't sustain relationships.
Not fine. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. This is Not Fine Thanks, our podcast series on everyday mental health that you, me, and those around us experience but don't always talk about. When I was looking for people to talk about for this episode, I didn't have to look very far. Working in a fast-paced newsroom among highly driven individuals meant that when I asked, hey, has anyone here experienced burnout? More than a few hands shot up. Okay, so let me begin by introducing the ones that I dragged out here today. I'm joined here by my friends and colleagues Eshwar and Parthavee. Eshwar heads the breaking news desk here at the Quint, and Parthavee heads audience engagement for Quint Fit, the Quint's health vertical. Later in the episode, I'll also be speaking to an actual professional, Dr. Kamna Chhibber. She heads the Department of Mental Health and Behavioral Sciences at Fortis Healthcare in New Delhi and will be sharing her insights into the matter. So do stick around for that as well.
The reason why we're all here, the elephant in the room, is burnout. We've all experienced it. And I think a lot of our listeners have also experienced it. And the three of us, I think we're around the same age, but also at kind of different stages of our career. I think I'm the least experienced, and I think then Parthavee and Eshwar are the other way around. But I have also experienced burnout. You guys have also. So I just want to kind of put it out there that you can experience burnout at any stage of your career. Like if you're like a young person who's just started and you're feeling burnt out, and someone's like, Abhi, if you're feeling like this, how are you going to, continue for 20 years or whatever? Don't listen to that, because anyone can experience it, right? Like I'm like you guys tell me, how do you know that you're burnt out?
What happens usually is there is inadvertently so much news getting consumed on a daily basis. Sometimes when I go home and I'm like, why am I consuming this much news on a daily basis? Why did I consume this piece of information today? It was a part of my job, yes. But at the end of the day, the job is done. And what I'm coming back home is with mental health issues. That's not always to say that it is the fault of the organization. When you're working in a newsroom in a country like India, we produce so much news on a daily basis that every other thing is big. There is one state where the government is falling. There is another state where communal riots have broken out. There is a country where abortions have been banned. So you do not know what to get to first. But what also needs to be done is to realize and understand where to draw the line and the boundaries.
So I'll just come to that, but I just want to draw back a little bit to what do you guys feel when you say you're burnt out? Because how is it different from having a really heavy news cycle and tired at the end of the week or looking forward to a weekend? Like for me, burnout is, when I experienced burnout, it was a complete lack of new ideas and the inability to keep up and do tasks that I know I'm capable of, but I'm not able to do it. So I want to push myself even more, but I'm not able to reach there. So then, you're pushing yourself, but not getting there. And then you're frustrated with yourself. And then a weekend doesn't help. A Sunday doesn't help. It's back to square one on Monday and you're just trying to catch up. So that's what the frustration is what I would associate with burnout, tiredness and frustration. So what does it feel like for you guys? Parthavee, do you want to chime in?
So I've been working for 8 years now. So there have been too many burnouts. But also working for the health vertical, everyone thought that everything shut down. So maybe it'll be lesser work, but not during COVID.
Yeah.
And we could not afford to take breaks at that time. And at the same time, we had family members, relatives, friends, whoever who got COVID, who passed away. So I think, especially in the last 2 years, it has been really heavy for everyone. We know that.
And the thing is, like, there's no like summer break, right? You have to figure it out while you're working. Like when you're burnt out, you have to deal with that while also continuing to work. And like I said, Eshwar, like with news, it never stops. So you don't get that breathing space to kind of stop and take a break and then get back to it.
Absolutely. So for me, burnout has pretty much been similar to what you mentioned. It has been it has been about not being able to perform the way I used to, not being able to come up with new ideas, and being mentally and physically exhausted all the time. Like I experienced this as recently as last week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, my Saturday was working. Eventually, my body gave up on Saturday evening. I caught a fever. And that is also because that there was just no mental break. And it was a brutal reminder last week of that beyond a point, I cannot abuse my body anymore.
But when you do like stop and take a break, or if you're like away from the desk, do you feel guilty or do you feel FOMO that I should be there, I should be doing
absolutely.
this? And the pressure isn't always like coming from some superior or from your institution.
Exactly.
It's like a self-imposed kind of a pressure where you're like, I can't miss out on this. I have to be doing this. Even when you're off, half your mind is at work.
Absolutely.
I can imagine that happening with you, especially since, you're on the desk.
Yep.
Like, remember your sister's wedding? Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, yes. So, a sister I grew up with, technically, in my parents' hometown, she called Akola in Maharashtra. She was getting married. A day before her wedding, during her haldi ceremony, serious Bipin Rawat died. I considered it to be my moral responsibility to log in. I was sitting outside the venue where there was a huge pillar at the entrance which had one little plug. I plugged in my laptop over there and I was sitting and I was working on the coverage of the death of serious Bipin Rawat. That was a day when you needed all hands on the deck. As the head of the team, I did not mind doing that day. I did draw a line that day. At 6 o'clock, this event took place at around 3:30 in the afternoon. I shut off at 6 o'clock. I helped as much as I could for 3 hours. And then things looked a little settled. I handed over to somebody else and I logged off. But that step has also come in my life after a lot of self-realization that yes, if I had the means to, it was my choice to log in that day. But drawing that line at 6 o'clock was also my choice, my professional responsibility, which I have to fulfill.
Yeah, and especially like young people, they give so much of themselves to their jobs, like because you're so enthusiastic and you want to do and you want to do your best. So I guess we don't think sustainably in that sense. We're just like, I'm here, I want to do my best, I'm going to give my all to my job, and then you kind of burn out like quite fast, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, school chota, or if you miss out work, पीछे छूट जाएंगे.
पीछे छूट जाओ. T-shirt बनने चाहिए स्लोगन के. कहाँ भाई? क्यों? Everybody has their different journey, and I am glad that as much as this generation is facing burnout sooner than we did, the youngsters, the teenagers of the present day are also way more aware of their options than we were. That is an advantage for them because they know when to say no. हम तो भाई ना कैसे बोलूं मैं?
And also, like Eshwar said, that you think you have to do it. We have this feeling that we have to finish this work. There's a limit, like this thing. It's like you have to compensate for things work-wise. That also comes from, like, as kids, especially our generation, we were taught that overachiever thing to impress the teacher. And that entire conditioning, it happens in such a way that we don't realize it might be a childhood thing. It turns out to be a forever thing. And forever you're trying to impress someone, but who is that someone?
The need to please everyone.
Yeah, and we don't even know who are we impressing. Like, I was not taking leaves and anything. Literally, I wasn't, apart from the times when someone passed away in the family. And my boss, I'm really thankful that I have a boss like that. My boss eventually tells me that, when are you taking your proper leave? Like, take it for a week or 10 days or something. And I also never, and even though I have a lot of leaves left, but I can avail them, you still feel guilty.
Yeah, so a lot of the burnout also is like a very self-inflicted thing.
And it also, a lot of times what does not get spoken about, that burnout has multiple contributors in your life. There are people living in very difficult conditions personally. That adds to the professional burnout. That adds to the overall burnout that you're facing.
And you're also so much more connected that you know the other person's life. At least you know like the version they're putting up online. And so like it's all so like
Absolutely.
there's so much more scope for you to feel like you're not doing enough or you're not achieving enough or you need to be doing more, or look at that person, he's my age and he's here and look at me and things like that.
Do you think, because in your initial years, you've kind of wanted to do so much and kind of pushed yourself so much, do you think you would retire sooner? It would make you want to retire sooner? Or do you think you've not probably thought of your career in a sustainable way so far?
Absolutely. So I'm not sure if it would want me to retire sooner. It would definitely
make me feel like I should.
Yeah.
And burnout also affects like other parts of your life, not just your work, right? Like
and everything, like you dating life for that matter. I don't want to meet people. I don't care about it anymore.
You're so tired at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like I don't have the energy to now
Meet a new
socialize
person,
also.
explain your entire life again to them. It's just too much. Like there was a time I used to love going out, meeting people. Like right before the pandemic, I used to be such a social butterfly. And now when I go out, people expect me to be the same, but I get really anxious around people. Like I just don't want to be around them. And for a person who would immediately reply to texts and calls, I just look at it. I keep staring at my phone. And even just taking that call feels so much.
So how do you guys deal with it? Like on a day-to-day basis, like how do you deal with your burnouts? What are the things that help you? Like you said, it took years of realizing. So what are the things, your coping mechanisms, I guess, that you've formed over the years that help you?
Like earlier, it has actually started with that realization that I don't have to be an overachiever first. So first thing I focus on is sleep. I'm not going to compromise on my sleep as much as I like going out. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. And eating right actually makes a lot of difference. Like, sometimes when we're tired, we feel like, let me sleep more, a few hours more. But that actually ruins your entire day. It makes you feel even more groggy. And
and when you're young and you're like caught up in your work, you feel like, oh, I can skip a meal, it's okay.
Yeah.
I can skip like
never.
2 meals, it's
not
okay.
anymore. Like I'm like, no matter what,
toll,
even if I'm not hungry that particular time, I will try to eat. Like not force feed myself extremely, but some small amount, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think each person has their own coping mechanisms. Like for me, looking forward to going home since work from office has started is a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going to go to my room, my bed, my Netflix. And what helps me personally, because I'm way in the middle of reality all day, like every other news break is a reality check of how messed up the world is, that I go home and watch cartoons. Netflix kids section is my favorite. Just cut off from the world that you exist in for 12 to 14 hours of your day. Even going away from reality for 2 hours helps a lot. And I don't know how many people can do it, but 6 a.m. workouts help the best.
Oh God, what have you suggested?
It has personally helped me in the past few months.
And also like just to say that, to manage expectations and to not take on more than you can handle, and to say I need help, I can't do this anymore. Like that's so important, right?
Oh yeah, that has happened. Like now Eshwar knows I wasn't feeling great. I just called him up and I was like, I just need to. I have to. Like, and I said later, I was like, I'm sorry. And he's like, relax. Everyone needs to talk like this. More people should reach out. We feel so awkward about just saying it because we've been told that, especially with our generation, we've been told that सबसे बात करने का जरूरत नहीं है, सबको बोलने का जरूरत नहीं है, the hush hush thing. But I've realized that everyone is literally desperate. Ki someone hear me out. If that child of yours is screaming from inside and nobody's listening.
And after all that talk of setting boundaries, Eshwar, I think you have to get back to work. So we'll just have to wrap this up now.
I'm gonna go home and sleep. Sorry, Eshwar.
Okay, thanks so much for joining me, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
There you have it, guys. You've got to do what you've got to do and find coping mechanisms of your own to get through it. Now let's go over to Dr. Kamna Chhibber. She routinely works with young burnt out professionals, and here's what she has to say.
Thank you so much, Anushka. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to talk to you about burnout, a rising issue, something which has always been present, but increasingly more so becoming a problem.
And Dr. Chhibber, we've been talking about burnout for a few minutes now, but often the word is used interchangeably with stress or fatigue. But burnout isn't merely stress, right? Because if you've had a stressful day or a week, a weekend's rest will usually do the trick, or taking a day off will help. But that's not how it necessarily works with burnout. So clinically, how do you differentiate burnout from stress or exhaustion?
If we try to understand burnout, it's very important for us to try and recognize that it certainly is different from the regular stress of day-to-day life that every individual goes through. Burnout in itself goes beyond regular issues of workplace, of day-to-day life. Because when you're feeling constantly tired, fatigued, it ends up being something which would be taken care of if you were to get adequate rest, if you were to start focusing on your own self and saying that, okay, I'm going to draw this boundary here, I will take the rest that I need, I'm not going to push myself extra hard to say that after a long day's hectic work, I will go out, meet friends, socialize, or, for young people also think of, partying out till late at night, coming back very late or early in the morning, and then again getting to work. So people, if they were to start making those smaller shifts to say that I would try and create a better balance, that in itself would be enough to take care of the exhaustion. And if, say, for instance, the exhaustion was happening on account of, say, disturbances in sleep, and if they were to just take care of the sleep hygiene piece of it, that would give the relief. But when you're talking about burnout, the simple strategies of, sleep hygiene or creating a little bit of a balance in your work and between the life choices that you're making would not lead to a significant change, because burnout will have all three components present. There will be a significant physical and emotional exhaustion. There will be a state of depersonalization, and there will also be a corresponding lack of personal and professional accomplishment. All three aspects would be present, and it would be impacting life in very significant ways, both professionally and personally. And simple changes may not necessarily make the kind of impact overall to make you recover from that feeling of burnout. And recognizing it is very important.
Right. So this really just brings me to my next question, which is, how do you recognize signs of burnout?
So I think when we work within our clinical spaces and we work with a lot of people who could be experiencing burnout at the workplace, some of the common things that get spoken of is how one has started noticing that, there is a lack of motivation to get to work. There is a lack of drive to do the things one would like to do. So there is, or usually a conversation would start with that I am not as invested in my work the way I used to previously be. And there is conversation around how that has become a huge problem, because one does have goals and ambitions. And those goals and ambitions are somewhere getting left behind. So there is a disconnect from one's own self in a way, because that work identity is such a core piece for most individuals who are working today, that it tends to impact the ways in which they're viewing their own selves in a very strong manner. And so that disconnect starts happening. And whereas they would be feeling that push or that pressure to say that I need to do more, other people are now beginning to take on my roles. I can see very clearly that my responsibilities are being shifted to others. There is constant feedback coming my way saying that I'm not doing enough, or I'm not as present in the meetings, in the interactions. So the kind of viewpoints or perspectives, ideas, strategies that I could come up with previously, those are not coming from my side as much. those aspects are being pointed out within the workplace, and that becomes a concern as well, because it starts leading to thoughts about what if people at the workplace realize that I'm not doing well. What if it leads to some sort of an impact on my job? What if, especially during this time period of the pandemic, what if it leads to a job loss? That has been a question which has come up for a lot of people.
Dr. Chhibber, something else that we discuss when we talk about our experiences with burnout is how it makes us want to push ourselves even more when we see that we aren't quite hitting those markers that we used to, but we're not able to, and that leads to more frustration and your burnout worsening, and then you're pushing yourself even more, but not really getting there. So I just want to know, is this something that happens? Is burnout cyclic in that sense?
Absolutely. It is pretty cyclical, and you just don't realize you become a part of that vicious cycle, and it's very hard to figure out, where do I pick up the pieces from now? What happens is that when we've interacted with people in this space, they would also share how somewhere work is now going back home even more, and work is what is probably consuming their entire life, and yet they're not being able to do enough. So it almost feels like you're trying to climb this mountain which is insurmountable. So you're constantly pushing and pushing and pushing, but you're not seeing the solutions coming in. And that becomes really difficult because you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And that becomes an experience, a vicious cycle, which gets created. So, it becomes so essential that if people can recognize that they're heading in this direction of a burnout, they take precautions as soon as possible. They start instating mechanisms to take care of their own selves, their well-being, to make sure that they don't get to this stage where it's almost like you have to now do crisis intervention to help pull out the individual from this entire situation. Because if you don't, then the other aspect is going to be disconnecting from people around, disconnecting from your own self in a way, from your workspace, and feeling completely unsupported because you find it difficult to pull yourself out of that negative loop. So you almost start feeling as though you're all alone in this space, surrounded by so many people, and yet there is no support system. And nothing seems to be giving you that kind of meaning, value to keep doing what you're doing.
Right. So like everyone said, burnout is more than just exhaustion, and it's not a one-way street. It can impact your work, your personal life, and further your mental health issues. So essentially, the way to get out of the cycle would be to recognize the signs early and act on it. Once a person has recognized the signs of burnout, once they know that they are burnt out, what can they do?
I think, there are two aspects to it. One, of course, is what can individuals do? And the second aspect is what can organizations do? And both those things, I think, need to go hand in hand if you're talking about both prevention of burnout and taking care of coping with burnout. I think the first aspect is to figure out what is it that is individually going on with you at your workplace that is causing that burnout. So there could be various spaces from where your distress is stemming. Is it the kind of work pressure that is coming on you? So there is too much job responsibility which is there. Which is making it into a very unmanageable workspace in a way for you. Is there lack of your role clarity? You're not certain about what are the kind of things that you need to do within your system. So you're constantly trying to figure out what next, or how do you manage things? Do you feel that there is something like an unfair treatment which is happening at the workplace? There are negative toxic relationships which are there. There is unreasonable time pressure, which is a part of the reason why you're feeling the kind of burnout that you're moving towards. Or there is lack of communication or support from your manager. So you need to identify as a first step, where is this burnout coming from for me as an individual? Because that's how you will be able to determine what your next steps need to be. I think the second aspect also is that you need to pay attention to and become aware of what it is doing to you. So every individual will have their own unique reaction or response to a situation. And even when you're looking at an aspect like burnout, it's not necessary that every type of symptom will be present in exactly the same way for every individual. Your experience will be unique. And if you're feeling that there is a struggle in coping with things, consistently your moods are getting impacted, consistently you're finding your performance is dipping despite you trying to put up some sort of an effort to change things, you're not being able to do that, reach out and seek help. Give attention to what you are feeling, because it's that attention which will ensure that you can work towards managing what is going on within you. The third aspect would be you need to start figuring out your boundaries. A lot of times what happens is, especially in this kind of world, and this is something that we in fact talk about in our book also, which we recently published, called Alone in the Crowd, where we talk about how people struggle to draw the right kind of boundaries and then choose to invest in their own self. And that is something which is very crucial, because we struggle to say no. We feel that we have to do something because we feel that if we don't, then someone else will be there who will take on that role. So there is this competition and comparison which is happening parallelly, which creates a lot of pressure as well. And we refuse to sometimes turn around and say that, okay, this does not work for me right now, or I don't have the skill set to be able to do this, or I may need more support to be able to do this. And being able to draw those boundaries is also going to be critical in how you're coping with the entire situation that you're experiencing.
Also, the pandemic has been quite instrumental in accelerating this process in a lot of people. Like, people I've spoken to in the industry, people have been working for decades, have, spoken about how in a normal situation, it would have taken you 10 or 15 years or maybe even 5 years to get to the point of being burnt out. But now it's happening so much faster.
For most people over these last many years, I think what has happened is work has become sacrosanct ground in a way. Everyone wants to ensure that they're paying so much attention and focus that we lose that balance, and somewhere we're not necessarily cultivating the right kind of interests outside of the workplace to ensure that we can feel relaxed, we can feel rejuvenated, we're able to do other things that hold value and meaning for us, because that's what allows us to be able to create the right kind of life for our own self. And you're able to manage the frustrations you may be experiencing which come across at the workplace better, because you have positive reinforcement coming to you from the other sides. So you have to view life from that holistic standpoint to say that work is one piece. There are these other pieces also. Right now, there may be struggle in one, but the others are coming along okay. So I can feel good about this. Also need to focus on building better relationships at the workplace. That's something which is very important. Having that sense of community can be very helpful. And this is something we've seen in the pandemic. People who have been able to connect with others going through similar experience have been able to take care of their well-being far better than those who did not have that kind of a support system. So that cannot be negated. And I think it's very important to keep on reinforcing the good that you're able to accomplish at the workplace. That's essential. While it's also necessary to find ways to communicate what your distress is to the people that you're working with soon, rather than waiting for things to build up to a level where it becomes unmanageable, uncontrollable, and also at a stage where it's also influenced by a lot of your own assumptions and inferences. So talking about things, communicating about them at an early stage is also very important. And like I said, ask for help if you're feeling that there are some things which are getting outside of your control. So as individuals, these are some things that can certainly be done. And I think the rest of the responsibility, somewhere it also falls on the organizations to start asking themselves if they're noticing that their employees are talking more about feeling stressed, feeling burnout, then we as organizations or leaders within the system need to start asking the question about what's contributing to such stress levels. Why is it that the workplace is becoming an unhealthy space? What can be done for the work environment so that there are conditions which allow people to grow, to flourish, to reach their goals? Because everyone wants to grow. Everyone has the need to do well. So what can be done in order to make sure that the workplace is safe? It's something which allows people to grow. And how do we contribute towards that? And if I think organizations, leaders start asking these questions, have more engaging conversations with people at the workplace with regard to a lot of these aspects, it can certainly ensure that burnout can be prevented. And once an individual employee feels that, my organization is invested in me, a lot of the problems can be taken care of in any case at that stage itself.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Not Fine, Thanks. Next week, I'll be joined by a couple of my friends and we'll be talking about something that plagues all of us, climate anxiety. And more importantly, how do you deal with it? So do tune in.